Hi, I'm still loony, I'm still talking about concrete battery, and it still stores electricity for utilities. Now, last week, I went to my local utility and I met this guy, Chuck. Now, Chuck's been working there for longer than I've been born. Chuck's been in charge of installing coal power plants and gas power plants. He even worked on the hydro plants way back in the day when he was a teenager. He knows how to get electricity up and running and onto the grid. Now, with that experience, what do you think they asked Chuck to do? They asked him to install the big utility scale solar and wind projects. And you know what drives Chuck nuts? Is that the hydro and the coal and the gas, well, when you turn them on, they stay on. And with the wind, he doesn't have any control over that. And the sun, well, the clouds come when they come and the sun sets when it sets. And it drives him bonkers. What he needs for his customers is power 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. He knows that, and he needs a solution to turn solar and wind into that solution. And this problem is only getting worse and worse for Chuck. The amount of wind energy and solar installed in this country in the past 10 years is just through the roof, and it's projected to be half of all the electricity installed by 2050. So we have a solution for Chuck. We have a utility scale solution that he can put in his entire utility. It's called a concrete flywheel. It is a humongous amount of concrete that is spinning and storing electricity, taking the excess power from the wind and solar installations and spinning it in a giant concrete flywheel for use whenever he needs the power. It does this using the simplest technology possible, using low-cost materials, creating a solution that Chuck really understands. It's like a very large hydro plant without the water. And not only did Chuck say that he wants a prototype of this installed as soon as possible at his utility, we've talked to 10 other people just like Chuck, 10 other utilities around the country. Half of them said yes, they want prototypes too. The other half said yes, they'll buy it as soon as it's proven. In addition, we talked to 10 wind and solar manufacturers, and they agree that they would love to have a solution that is 24 by 7 by 365. And their question is just, can we do it cheap enough? So with all those conversations, here are our revenue projections. We think they're rather modest. We think they're conservative. We're pretty sure we can hit these numbers. All we need in the first year is one customer, 3 prototype flywheels, $300,000 in revenue, and this grows to 100 customers doing $50 million in revenue by year 5. Yes, it's a hockey stick, but it's a rather modest hockey stick given the trillions of dollars of installed electricity generation equipment in this country alone. And yes, there is a large amount of competition in this space. There are a large number of groups that are trying to solve the problem of utility scale energy storage. There are, in fact, 3 other companies that sell flywheels today. But the big difference is that they went down a high-tech path. You see, the amount of energy you can store in a flywheel is dependent on a few factors, one of which is how fast you spin the flywheel. So they went down the path of making something that spins incredibly fast, faster than a jet engine. And in order to do that, they had to use carbon fiber. In order to do that, they had to use bearings that never touched anything and magnetics. And oh my God, it got to the point where no one could afford one of these flywheels. And in fact, one of these 3 companies, they got a huge government loan and still went bankrupt. Well, there's a bunch of other technologies as well. Those are shown through the middle of this diagram. There are battery technologies and compressed air in giant caverns. There are solutions to pump the water back up to the lake at the top of the hydro plant. But despite this competition, we are adamant that we will be the lowest cost provider of utility scale storage anywhere. And again, that is based on our use of simple designs that are deployable anywhere in a manner that makes them cost effective to deploy in lots of different settings. Underneath those turbines, next to the power plants at the electric utility, and even outside hospitals that need some backup storage. We got an awesome team. You heard about them later, I'm not going to repeat that. We need some funding. You heard about that, I'm not going to repeat that either. Thank you for coming. Okay, 3rd iteration, and I'd say it's on the track to getting good. Right? It's good. It's better than most that I've seen, but it's still not great. So what made it better? Well, now we have this character, Chuck, and we can use Chuck all the way through the story. We could probably find a way to get Chuck into the competitive piece. Maybe we'll, I've never actually talked to a Chuck, but maybe Chuck has talked to one of these companies and we can talk about that in the competition slide. Maybe Chuck has committed to purchasing one of these. We can talk about that in the revenue slide. Ideally, we get Chuck all the way through to the end. Ideally, Chuck's utility company wants to invest. That would be awesome. That would be a really great piece of traction to talk about. Now, before moving on, I just want to go back and point out a few things on a few of these slides. So here we go, slide 2, we got Chuck in here. I just want to point out, I could never find a picture of Chuck and a windmill. This isn't Chuck, in fact. I found a picture of a guy in a hard hat sitting on the internet, and I pulled out that picture, and I pulled out a separate picture of a bunch of windmills, and I just basically pasted them together. It's marketing. It doesn't have to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The next slide is one about trends. I really like the one I used before that talked about 50% of the electricity will be from wind and solar in 2050, but it was just too hard to read. It was just too much detail. Whereas this slide from the same site, the Energy Trends Insider, so a well-known, well-respected site in energy, right? This one shows a hockey stick graph. And that's it. I just want a feeling of high growth. I want to show that this market is taking off, that we're following a trend, and that we're still pretty early in that trend. All right, so I grabbed this slide instead. And then my absolute favorite slide is the next one when I talk about concrete flywheel. Because just to be clear, this is not a picture of a concrete flywheel. There is no such thing as a concrete flywheel. This is, in fact, a picture of a building, a very large concrete building. I don't remember what's inside. It doesn't really matter. Those things on the outside you're looking at, those are lights, just so you can tell the scale. Those are very large outdoor floodlights. This is a humongous concrete building, and this picture just pulls out that feeling of huge, and it's concrete, and so it just oozes concrete and flywheel. There's two things I want to point out on this slide. One, I did in fact find a picture online with both solar panels and a windmill. However, the windmill was too tall. So there has been a tiny bit of photoshopping here, and the windmill has been shortened in order to fit on the slide. Secondly, but more importantly, compared to the previous versions, this slide's been simplified just a bit. So first and foremost, since we're talking about Chuck, and he works for a utility company, that has been moved first and foremost on the bullet list, right? The electric utilities. Now in reality, maybe that's true, maybe that's not. Nonetheless, it makes for a better story, and so I'm sticking with it. We're going to talk to Chuck. We're going to try and sell you to electric utilities. What may happen is they're too slow. They may take 9, 12, 18 months to put in a prototype, and we may, in fact, do wind and solar manufacturers first. But that's not a good story. The better story is to stick with Chuck. We're going with the electric utilities. And that third bullet was about a third piece selling backup power to data centers, hospitals, and so forth. It still might happen, but it doesn't add to the story. It's additive, perhaps, to revenues, but it may, in fact, be distractive to revenues. So I took it out. Less is more. Less detail sometimes makes a better story. In this third revision, I switched to the magic square version of the competition slide rather than the competitive matrix. And I did that because the competition is really more about these other technologies that are unproven, which is just like concrete battery, it's unproven, versus the named competitors, which are out in the market, in one case bankrupt already, that aren't really direct competitors. Their technology has proven not to work at the right price for utilities. They are only selling to hospitals and other companies that need backup power. So they're not really the ones we should focus on. We should focus on pumped water and compressed air and so forth. And lastly, I think the competitive advantage slide doesn't need to be here. I think by the time we got to this slide, we said these words over and over again. We've seen enough windmills. We can take this out, put more detail in somewhere else. Now, what would you do for a fourth revision? How could you make this even better? Well, you can try doing that right now. You can try taking the concrete flywheel example. You have the background information from the book. You can go through and see on your own, can you make that better?